Okay, so here I had an urge to react to a video that I saw, and so I can't even really read the name of it in the position that I'm in, but I'll try to catch a peek of it. It is Cliffe something. He's basically discussing you'll know what it is when I start talking about it. I hate this with the orientation of shorts, that it always plays shorts vertically, so I'd have to change my whole phone stand position for what I'm doing. It's, his last name starts with a C, reveals dark truth about atheists. And again, atheist itself is a non-label and an invalid term. There's no such thing as an atheist, or we're all born atheists. It's not an outward position. So you don't define somebody by what they don't do, you define somebody by what they do. So if you're religious and you can specify the religion, that's fine. Right, and I'm not saying there's even anything wrong with that, but it's an outward position to be religious. It's not an outward position to simply, you're born and you don't automatically believe in God or believe in something. You have to actively be indoctrinated into the church or the specifics and the particulars of it. That's one of my main objections to religion. I've said it can be positive psychologically, it can give people structure, etc. So I'm not even somebody who would be against it, but I don't like the real intellectual dishonesty with it, which this guy even says here. I did see this clip earlier, but it's a case where the problem is, again, you compare it to folly favoritism, or at least I've done this, where how could you say you don't believe in religion because it's not real or true or logical, but then you indulge in entertainment and escapism? That's not real either. And yet you take a certain amount of time on it and you let it have a certain amount of impact in your life, right? Why would you spend your time on something that you know isn't real? The comparison is good, but the difference is actually pretty telling. With fiction or folly favoritism, you acknowledge it isn't real, so you're doing it for psychological reasons and you enjoy it, etc. With religion, you are pretending it's real, and even so real that it dictates your life or standards that are above, ordinary human conjecture. So basically, you're not acknowledging it's not real. That's the difference. So folly favoritism, it's not real, so you're only doing it for escapism or entertainment or enrichment of creative, inspiration and stuff. That's fine because, it's still a flawed process, but at least you're acknowledging, okay, I know it's not real, but I'm just indulging it. Whereas with religion, you're not doing that. You're saying it's real, you're saying it's absolute, etc. So let's look at this guy's argument. It's one of those things that I'm just disappointed in when I hear it. And there's a lot of likes on the video. There's a lot of comments agreeing with what he's saying. There's actually a warning because he talks about suicide. So YouTube gives you a warning about it. But look, dude, it's a very... Let's just address it. I mean, I've dealt with this kind of argument before. It's an idyllic desire qui bono argument, right? That's the anti-fallacy here, is my qui bono effect that I talk about. Not really my term, but the effect and way I use it. Who benefits from what he's saying, or what argument is actually being made? Does he make any sort of logical, specific, substantive argument to justify a particular religion or even religions in general? Because what I always point to is, how can you say yours is right and everyone else's is wrong? You could say, oh, well, that actually validates it, the fact that so many different cultures throughout history have all been religious. What are the chances of that? But it seems like a positive, but it actually hurts the argument, because that just shows you people have a psychological need, and so the specifics are arbitrary. Greek gods we treat as mythology today, or other, countless gods in different religions throughout history. We dismiss all of those, but oh no, we're going to believe in Christianity now. That's the right one. This time we got it right, and every other one is wrong. See, that's not even my position. Like, oh, you're just subjectively a non-believer, or the only way I guess an atheist, supposed atheist, like you'd use that as a label, would be if you were anti-religion, like, oh, you're against it and you're actively arguing, but it's not even agnostic. You don't have to qualify it. Like, I don't have to explain the secrets of the universe as a mere lowly animal who has slightly greater self-awareness than other animals. That's what a human being is. Like, we're way too narcissistic and egotistical to think that we should have all the answers to the universe from day one. It's the unwillingness to be puzzled, absurdist fallacy. Like, no, we don't have all the answers to the universe. We don't know everything. Even with thousands of years of technological advancements in science, we still don't have all the answers to the universe, right? That's the more mature, logical thing to say, instead of, oh no, we have all the answers. The universe is made in our image, you know, the world, and God made us in his image, and everything revolves around us, and when an animal kills an animal, it's okay, but when we do it, it's the end of the world, like, according to these idyllic, you know, higher standards, not just that enforceable by human subjective structures, like, you know, law enforcement, etc. Like, we get why we have that. Right, again, it's not a functional argument, so people always try to hide behind that with some sort of straw man fallacy, like, well, if you say killing a person isn't absolutely wrong and there is no God, then how can you have morality? Well, I could tell you how, like the golden rule, like, I don't want to be killed, so I'm not going to kill other people. How about that? Or just common respect for other people. Why can't you have that? Like, and people fear that subjective basis, though, because then, oh, it's your word against mine. So if somebody feels like, oh, well, I'm not killing people out of respect, or I'm not committing crimes out of respect, but somebody else could just as easily say, well, I feel like doing it anyway. But they do that despite the law and despite your supposed God anyway. But it's like the subjective versus the absolute versus the subjective. Like, you're trying to put a standard that's above that. Like, somebody might subjectively say killing someone is wrong, or maybe they'd say killing somebody is right, or it's okay. But the difference is that's one word against another. So even if you have 99.9% of people say this thing is wrong, all it takes is that 0.01% to say, oh no, it's right, and then they can just, you know, it's your word against theirs. So no matter how much collective agreement you have, it's still subjective versus subjective. It's just one subjective person versus another, instead of, oh no, it's God saying it, it's not me saying it, it's God saying it. So you kind of bypass that critical faculty and say, so now it makes it absolute, instead of, oh no, it's just a subjective standard that we have to subjectively enforce. And so, yeah, being an atheist is not our position. You don't even have to qualify it agnostic. Why can't you just not know, but veer on the side? Like, I would say, I would be relatively neutral, but what actually pushes me in the other way is all the specifics and particulars of it. Like, again, how can every religion be wrong and yours be right? How can there be so many different little nuances? Like, oh, there happens to be an elephant god in India. Oh, what are the chances? Because there are elephants around them, so they're taking in what's in their environment, right? Show me something from religion that isn't man-made, like, you know, in terms of scripture and stuff. It's all a reflection of their immediate environment around them, or certain standards and morality that people would want to have in society anyway, like laws and crimes are reinforced there and stigmatized, or something else, like, it's just all idyllic at a distance, like non-accountable, false absolute. So, again, I'm not even denying that some hypothetical possibility, but the more you hear about people's framing of it, it feels arbitrary. I don't need to justify, like, oh, something isn't the case. You would need to justify it, and all the justifications come from a place of desire and psychological need that, again, can be positive and give people structure, but that doesn't make it true. That's the only point. It doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it absolute. It could make it useful, so I'm not even denying that. Although I would argue that just as much as it can be useful, it can also be damaging. So I would never be the person to say, oh, billions of people have been killed throughout history, and even to this day, you know, various times, in the name of religion, because I'm not going to blame it on that. Like, if religion didn't exist, people would still kill other people as they have throughout history. And, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to do that, even though that would be a cop-out sort of argument. I can't talk for some reason. My voice is completely fucked up. The point is that, you know, I'm not going to act like that, oh, all these people were killed in the name of religion, because it's still just ultimately a pretense. How people use it is different than, you know, so I'm not going to say that. But I'm also not going to completely say, well, it gives people structure and peace of mind, so therefore that makes it true, right? You can make a functional argument that, oh, we can believe something that we know isn't true because it's useful and enjoyable, or, you know, it gives us peace of mind and stuff like that. Fine. You want to make a functional argument, I can accept that at times. Although, again, you get lost in the details and the specifics. My logical razor don't specify the conflict comes into play. Like, generally, okay, if it gives you structured peace of mind, some of these, moral standards and stuff to follow. But you get caught up on all the little particulars, like, oh, this arbitrary tradition here, you can't eat meat on this day, you can't eat fish on that day, whatever you want to get caught up in. That's where it becomes arbitrary. Like, what does that really have to do with anything? And even you see people try to adjust it and say, oh, when the Bible says that being gay is wrong, oh no, it doesn't actually mean that. And Christians now accept that, that somewhat, depending, and they try to do revisionist history and say there's a lot of bigoted things potentially in the Bible, which, again, I'm not passing judgment on that. I'm just saying if you want to believe it, then believe it all the way, and if you don't, then don't. But instead, oh no, we'll change it to suit the modern machination process of the time that we happen to live in. Did Jesus say to sit on your phone for 5 hours a day? Did Jesus say to drive a car? Did Jesus say to, engage in all this machination process, pollution and all this ravaging of resources around the planet? Did Jesus say something about using Facebook and Twitter, or like fucking, what is all this? This is like machination process that wasn't there at the time, and you might think, oh, those things are just arbitrary and specific, but actually that's not true, because there were a lot of specific references at the time that were made based on the technology that was available then. So the problem with belief is, again, it comes from a place of desire. So what can be difficult with that is there's really not much of an argument to even be had. Again, you cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire, one of my logical razors in my debate format. The ultimate point is the fact that let me think here. You have the ability to consider that you cannot dissuade with the reason what came about by desire. So it's like two separate arguments that you're having, and again, you get lost on the specifics and the particulars of it. It can be used for both good and bad purposes. It can give people structure, everything like that. This is really annoying to do. Hang on. When I decide not to put my mic on, I'll just fix it right now. Okay, I hooked up the mic so it makes it a little easier. I don't know why I do that. I go into it not expecting that I'm going to do a session when I'm driving, and then I feel like doing it in the middle. But no, let's look at this again. I've shredded the same sort of argument with the qui bono effect. Like, your argument is basically it's comforting and peace of mind, and it's also appealing to the human ego and narcissism. So how could you not believe it? You go to heaven and all these wonderful things happen, and the people you don't like go to hell, and it gives you so much peace of mind. Like, so in other words, people have a strong psychological need and desire to believe it, so therefore you should believe it. On a functional level, maybe that could be made, but that does not make it accurate or true. In fact, you're sidestepping the whole issue. You're saying, look at all these positive benefits or desirable aspects of believing in it. Like, oh, I want to believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. Just because you want to believe something doesn't make it true. In fact, it hurts the argument, and that's where the qui bono effect comes in. Like, look at the incentive behind it. Right? If you want to believe, okay, good. But it's not enough. You have to outwardly insist. You have to make a big thing out of it. You have to make a big spectacle. There's a quote like that. A man says to the universe, "Sir, I exist." And then the universe responds. The universe doesn't respond. That's the better point. Like, we don't care about your narcissistic ego. You're just an animal that's slightly greater self-awareness. Rather than be grateful for that, you instead, have this cognitive dissonance and contrivance. I'll explain this as we go through, but it bothers me because, again, you don't need to label atheists. We're all born atheists. You don't need to justify what you don't do. Again, you don't say like, oh, this person's a walker because he's not driving a car. This guy's a driver because he doesn't walk. Like, you don't say what somebody doesn't do of all the things in existence they could potentially do, right? You don't say, oh, he's not a Christian. He's not a... No. You say, if you are something outwardly, yes. There's nothing outward about being an atheist. You're just living. You're just alive, like an animal. Is an animal an atheist? Do insects and other creatures have religion? So it shows you quite clearly what the blueprint is. That yes, if you could maybe point to some more intelligent animals, right, starting to do stuff like that, where as an animal becomes more intelligent, it would start to have ritualistic tendencies and faith and belief. So in other words, it's not a product of reality, it's the product of your psychological need that, again, in an uncertain, unknown world, you have the unwillingness to be puzzled, you want some answers, you want some false certainty, you want some peace of mind, you want some comfort about all the unknown subjective, contemplation of the mind and secrets of the universe. You want some answers to that. So the solution is to just pretend, or to, again, seek meaning in your environment. Like, oh, it's storming, it's raining, and you can't explain the weather. So now that's the whole irony. People say in the modern day religion is dying out and people are becoming, sacrosanct to religion. Couldn't it just be that science is becoming more advanced and we have a lot more answers? Again, not all the answers in the universe, but that we have more answers than we had in the past. So instead of relying on, falling back on superstition, like, oh, it's if you offer something to the gods, they'll give us rain for our crops. Instead, now we can explain how the rain works, and to some extent we might even be able to control it, as we go forward. So, like, with our technology, we can control the weather. And there's a lot of conspiracies to do with that, but clearly it's something we could do. So now you're putting power back in human hands and saying, well, we understand how it works, so we don't need to be superstitious and ritualistic about it. Because that's all those things do. Even if you're right, you're wrong in that sense. Like, oh, we're going to defer and cede power to God. But God is so powerful that, assuming, is even real, etc., that it wouldn't matter. So in other words, you caring about God or thinking about God or deferring to God is irrelevant. God has given you the ability and power to do what you can do. So pretend God doesn't exist and do the maximum that you can with the ability that you have. Don't worry about, oh, I'm going to just let things go where they will and God will guide me. No. God has given you the potential that you have that you'll never meet because you're in this half-mass reductive state. But this is what religion does, or faith in general. It takes power away from people. Don't reach your maximum full potential in this finite zero-sum existence because, oh, we have promises of heaven and all this, like, the point being that, oh, God, it's just so dumb. Like, okay, so atheism is not a position, right? You don't need to justify not doing something. They need to justify doing it. And in those very specific, particular ways. And again, it shows you the psychological need, the ritualistic tendencies, the desirability or even functionality if it does not create a factual foundation or basis. So it's one of those, again, closed structure contrivances where why do you believe it or why is it so? Just because you want it to be. And you just insist upon it, and part of it is even to not hold yourself accountable, right? Oh, it's heretical to... Man, I really cannot talk today. I don't know what it is. It is heretical to question it as if, no, God has given you the ability to question it with your mind, but then, oh no, we aren't allowed to. Not that it holds up to any questions very well, that you would be able to hold it accountable as much as you want. And then the other point is the fact that you have but that's one of the biggest claims I could make is that, religion takes power away from people because you're saying, I'm going to defer to God, I'm going to pray to God. You're going to hope that God does something. But if God could be influenced by your subjective hopes, then it wouldn't be God at all, because then he would just be at the mercy of your whims, right? And you could just control him completely, and then, that wouldn't make sense, and other people would be doing the same thing. So God doesn't care about your little whims and your personal self-interest, despite your narcissism that you think the universe revolves around you. But it's ironic, too. The basis of religion is narcissistic, that we think, oh, we are created in God's image and this and that, and all these standards, revolve around our interests and intentions. But then it also reduces you to a supposedly humbled state where, oh, I'm going to be reduced to this lesser state than my full potential and self-actualization would do. And so now, I don't know. It strips away your potential. It makes you defer to invisible authority. It makes you reduce to a half-mass state. never reach your full potential, never fully self-actualize, self-awareness, full objective. Again, all these things that even if you were religious, you would say, well, God created you with the capacity to do all this, and you're undermining it in the name of God. Like, you know, all these things that God supposedly wouldn't have wanted you to do, but created you with the ability to do, and you have to resist it. Like, you have to prove something to God. Like, why would... Again, we're dealing in absolutes here, that, like, God, this all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing being, would not want you to kill another person. God doesn't want you to kill. But God is so weak in that will of stopping you from killing that it would come down to your subjective desire. If you feel like doing it, you can just do it, right? And then it comes down to subjective human enforcement and indoctrination, like you punish them and you try to stigmatize, like, why? So in other words, God is just sick by how we would define it. He wants to see people suffer and struggle, even though he could have just prevented us from doing that in the first place. Like, create us with the inability to kill, either physically or mentally. We just somehow we won't do it. If he didn't want us to do it, just don't do it, right? We would not have the capacity to even do it. So, or like, for example, faith. If there was a God, then evidently they don't want us to believe in him because they give us the option not to, right? So it's like the emperor has no clothes fallacy. Like, oh, if you don't believe, you just don't get it. But if God was so powerful and God wanted people to believe in him, then we would have no choice, or it would be so, foregone conclusion. But instead, oh no, you have to kind of, dance around it and do mental gymnastics, and it's like, on one hand, a lot of these arguments would point to either God's not all-powerful, in which case then a lot of this is moot, like there's a lot of flaws and incapabilities, or God is all-powerful, but then don't even worry about it because God's going to do what God's going to do. You can't influence it, you can't impact it. Worrying about it, thinking about it, caring about it, praying about it, none of that is going to matter, right? God has God's plan, and just don't even give it a second thought and focus fully on your potential and the impact that you can have. Don't focus on things you can't control, right? Like God's will, supposedly. So again, God is outside your control, like the weather is outside your control. Well, I was just saying how it might not be entirely, but you know what I mean? Like, don't even worry about it then. Maximize your ability, your potential that you have, and human potential and ability, and then whatever God's going to do, God's going to do. And if you could impact it subjectively, it's a moot point. What else do I have to say? The fallacy, our premise dictates that that everything must be created in our human logic, but then by that logic, God too must be created, right? So if the question is what created the universe, and your answer is God, then God too must be created. And if God can be exempt from that need to be created, then why can't the universe be? So either way, you're posing an absolute and a premise and then making an exception to it. So it's your own internal claim, right? I could just say, okay, maybe everything doesn't need to be created, and I can't explain that because, again, I don't have all the answers of the universe. But you see how the false certainty, false absolute is favored by a mindless mass of sheep, I guess you could say, that, like, if you say with certainty, yeah, people would cling to the certainty, even if it's completely nonsense, right? Just make something up rather than just say, maybe we don't know. Maybe we aren't all-knowing, right? We're not gods ourselves. So how would we have known this thousands of years ago with even a lesser state of technology, right, than what we have now? But again, it's a psychological need, and it is a case where... Oh, yeah, this is one of my quotes as well. I guess I'm going through a lot of things to do with religion, but they often fall on deaf ears when I've had these conversations. Like, people just want to believe, so they'll believe, but that's fine. That's where that one quote comes in so key. That's my biggest logical razor on religion. You cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire. So in other words, it doesn't matter. You're trying to discuss it logically and rationally in terms of facts and details or whatever. It doesn't matter because the reason why they believe it isn't because of facts and logic and reason. So you can't poke a hole in that because that's not why they believe it. They believe it because they want to. That's all. Not everyone, but there might be youth indoctrination, and so that might be why. But I'm just saying, like, mainly people believe it because they want to, because it gives them peace of mind, comfort, etc. That's why. So because they believe it because they want to, you would have to appeal to that desire, like, okay, I'll give you something else to believe in that's even more desirable, or remove the need, absolutist tendency, but instead you get this thing like you're not, again, you cannot dissuade with reason what came about by desire. That's one of my favorite logical erasers that I've ever come up with from my debate format. It's very on point. It's what I do when I just feel helpless in an argument, not because I can't win the argument, but it's just like you realize the nature of the argument, right? It's not me logically arguing against somebody else logically. It's me arguing against, well, I want there to be a heaven, and it gives me comfort. So effectively is what they're saying. So you can't win that. But no, this is another one, and then I'll get into watching this. It's just a short, but certainly got me in the mood. This is called, this concept I talk about is sort of the blame and the thinking. I can't remember what exactly I called it, but when something bad happens, right? Let's use any example, like a natural disaster or some horrible event, right? Something bad happens, and again, the absolutist harsh perspective, without all these kind of things would be like, well, it's your fault for living in a flood zone. It's your fault for, it might sound harsh, elitist victim blamer, but there's a deeper meaning to it. It's placing full emphasis on your potential, human potential ability. So it's putting humans not on a pedestal, but in the forefront. Like, well, you knew that area could flood, so why did you live there, right? You could have lived anywhere else, potentially find a way, so you're putting yourself in a situation where you're aware, or you could be aware of all the positives and negatives. So then when the negative happens, you should be like, well, I should have expected that. I should have been better prepared for that. I should have found an alternative. So it's your measure, your choice, your process, and then you suffer the consequences of it. So that would be the onus that the absolutist puts. And again, it's holding human beings in high regard, that we are much more capable and intelligent than what we are reduced to structure and practice, killing our potential, basically. But no, you don't blame God when something bad happens, like, again, the disaster or some horrible event. But then you thank God when it ends. Like, oh, thank God for saving me from this horrible event. But you don't blame God and say, well, what about blaming him for putting you in that situation in the first place or allowing it to happen? So you'd say, oh, thank God for ending the flood. But you don't say, curse God for flooding my area that I live in and my house and everything. Like, so what you're using is it's a non-accountable closed structure standard that it can never be wrong. So when something good happens, it's thanks to God. When something bad happens, it's not God's fault. Or it's okay, it's part of God's mysterious design. So even by your own subjective standard, it's not consistent at all. So what you get into is, like, luck is the same thing. You think everything revolves around you. So what you have is the ability to consider this okay, you have the ability to consider that either God is not that powerful then, so God can't prevent bad things from happening, but God can help end the bad thing, so he only deserves selective credit and not blame. So you're saying he's not really all-powerful, or that God just doesn't care or have your interest in mind, so it's like God wants to see you suffer or allows you to suffer and then intervenes at some random undescribed point and then saves you from that suffering that they put you in the first place. So that would show you why God's not on your side, or God is objective and doesn't take sides. So in that case, then why does any of that matter? Why would you thank God for taking you out of that situation and not blame him for putting you in that situation? Again, it's the same criteria. I'm not even making a claim. I'm just supposing, okay, God is all-powerful, so bad things happening would also be within their control. So they're making bad things happen only to end the bad thing from happening, and then you're grateful that it ended, but you're not holding that against it, that it started and that it happened in the first place, basically. Okay, let's look at this. Cliffe something, his last name starts with a K. I can't read because it's at a wrong angle, but it doesn't matter. Reveals like a dark truth about atheists. It's the one that's sort of censored by YouTube because you have to confirm it deals with sensitive topics like suicide, that he does say that in there. So, okay, we're starting. I don't even have to do the timestamp, but I'll just keep pausing it. So let's see what he says. I mean, Just think about the results of living a life without God. It's meaningless. Okay, so we start here with the cui bono effect already. Right, I'll keep pausing it because whatever, it's a short video anyway. So you're saying it's meaningless. So there's two problems with this, right? The first is the human ego, right? That, again, all we are is self-aware animals with slightly greater intelligence than other animals. So now we think the world revolves around us. There needs to be some special meaning, right? It has to somehow cater to us. We have to have some other element that we find in it. Like, what is an animal's meaning of life? They live because they're alive. So you can say it's a result of a random process in nature and they can't explain it. But they live, they try to live, that could be the meaning from a naturalistic perspective. Just live as long as you can, or live, enjoy what you can. Eat the sweet nectars of nature and just, soak it all in and just live as long as you can. Experience different things that the world has to offer, and that could be it. Why does it have to be any special meaning? It's a zero-sum process, right? Like, that's just a narcissism that human beings have, that they think everything revolves around them and they're so special and everything like this, right? Heavy ego involved. Why does there have to be special meaning? Is there special meaning for an insect? Is there special meaning for for a dog, for an animal, other animals? So the fact that we even look for that special meaning is itself the problem. And it's also a byproduct of contrivance. We have to try to find meaning when we're reduced to a lesser state than our inherent natural state, again, through contrivance. That we can't do this, we can't do that, we're inhibited in this way, we have to adhere to contrivance that way. So because we're reduced to this unnatural contrivance state, now that goes against our inherent tendencies, now we have to contrive some meaning potentially, right? Some of the desire for it comes from that. We have to contrive it because now we're restricted, so we have to overcompensate and try to cope with that. Whereas if you lived an inherent natural lifestyle, now you wouldn't have those questions or cognitive dissonance, because what you see is what you get. Nature is nature. Go pick the berries, go enjoy, whatever it is that's out there. And just like, what you have is the ability to consider that, again, this desire for meaning or expectation of it is a very egocentric, human-centric, self-obsessed, narcissistic point of view that people have. That, again, what meaning do animals have? They're alive because they were born and they exist and they try to live and they try to survive. This doesn't need to be any more meaning for them than that, but for us, there is. So, and again, even if you were correct, now that's the first problem, is, again, to even seek meaning is narcissistic, right? And what you point to with that. But number two is, even if you were right and saying, oh, well, that means it's a meaningless existence, that doesn't explain adequately why religion is valid. That gives you the cui bono, like why you would want to believe it. Like, okay, so now you're pointing out the psychological need or desire that people have that's not rooted in truth or logic or reason. You're saying that people have an incentive and a bias and a desire to believe something to try to give them structure and meaning where they otherwise might feel that it's lacking. And I've also laid out the contrivance response structure. Like, you're not simply born in your inherent state and just doing what you're naturally doing, like an animal would even do. Just the world is your oyster, just uninhibited, right, in your natural state. Since you're so heavily indoctrinated and you have to constantly contrive, respond against the inherent nature of your being, like everything you might naturally do, you have to contrive and respond against it, and you're not at peace with your own inherent nature and tendencies, and you even deny them, and you pose a false inherent contrivance response state. And so now you create this artificial contrivance structure that may be functional, may have its benefits, may overextend, but because you do that, now you created an unnatural state. So now perhaps you're seeking meaning or some other reinforcement, and the reason why you're doing that is because of the simple fact that you are the reason why you're doing that is because You're doing it because of the simple fact that, sorry, when it gets bad driving, suddenly I get distracted like that. There's that blinking light again, some fucking barn. He had fixed it for a while there. Look, what I'm saying is that you have a contrivance state where I like when people overtake me, like, just fucking do it then, like, I don't care. Yeah, like the contrivance state. So, like, you have all these inherent tendencies in nature, and you're neither at peace with them nor acknowledge it, nor you actively contrive against it, which, again, you might think that's useful and functional. I'm not even debating that. I'm saying because you do that, again, it creates an unnatural state, so now you have to justify your half-masked existence. That how can I justify, it's the right thing to do because God says so, to sacrifice my own inherent desires, instead of just hedonism, I'm going to have orgies and I'm just going to pick berries freely and the whole world is my oyster and take whatever I want and just, do whatever I want. Instead of being able to do that inherent state of being that would have at least less cognitive dissonance associated with it, no, now you're reduced to a half-mass state where you're heavily inhibited in every major way, right? If your base inherent tendencies, inherent desires, suggested, etc. Now, because of that, whether you would be a hedonist or whatever you want to call it, because you're so heavily inhibited, now you have to justify that somehow and say, well, it's okay to sacrifice so much because we're peasants working for heaven, is the expression that I said. Sacrifice in this lifetime the finite zero-sum existence that you have in front of you. And if you sacrifice that, then you're able to sacrifice the thing that you know for sure, that you're alive, you're here, your finite zero-sum existence is in front of you. Sacrifice that for promises of some heaven, some eternal life that you can't guarantee and you're not sure of. So that's, again, a great way to control people and reduce them to the structure, where you have you reduce them to structure because, at least if I get in a crash, you'll get my live audio reaction, because this is fucking... Look, dude. It's really the way that other people drive, too, is the problem. Like... Right, like, I would never have a problem, but other people create the problem. Like, fucking do whatever you want, overtake me if you want. My point was that you would have this ability to again, you're reduced to a half-mass state, so you have to justify it somehow, and again, part of that justification would be inhibit and diminish this life, this finite zero-sum life that you're sure of that's in front of you, for promises of heaven that you can't verify and you're not sure about and everything like that. And so you're reducing this state that you're sure about for some promise of eternal life or heaven or etc. So it's a great way to control people, again, because people won't be content with being reduced to a half-mass state and being inhibited heavily and controlled. But, oh no, you're doing it for that reason. So you can convince peasants to work for the promise of heaven. That, if you're a good little peasant and you inhibit yourself in every way in your life, you'll get gratification and social contrivance will reward you and all that, which that's kind of a partly separate process, but it's the same similar concept, like that you will also be rewarded, you'll go to heaven for that. So it's a great way to control people. I almost don't even want to do this now, but it's not like there's much of a video. So again, the fact that it's meaningless, though, getting back to that point, on one hand, it's a narcissistic, egocentric, human-centric perspective that you think everything has to have meaning anyway, right, beyond just it's a zero-sum process, you just exist, you're just born, you're just like an animal, slightly greater self-awareness, right? It's not that everything is you're made in God's image and everything revolves around you and you have all the answers and, you have a grand scheme and grand meaning. It could just be a zero-sum process, just like animals, just like we see in nature. That could just be the reality of it. So your desire for the special meaning is itself telling that, again, it's an egocentric perspective. And then the second point is, even if you're right in saying that, okay, it's meaningless, and that's a negative, then, and assuming you're right in seeking that meaning, etc., the problem with that is the simple fact that or you should never go on like local roads or side roads when it's bad, because they don't get plowed or any shit. Like, they don't give a fuck. That's the funniest thing. Like, it could be the worst storm ever, but if you drive on like a highway, throughway, like a main road, it'll be just fine. It'll actually be great, right? Because they address that immediately and prioritize that. But if you drive, even if it's not too bad, you drive on some shitty back road, local road in the countryside, it'll be horrible because they don't give a shit about that. Like, that's the problem. But no, my point is that, again, even if the meaningless premise is correct, what is the real point of that argument? Believe in this fantasy that gives you a sense of purpose and peace of mind. Otherwise, oh my goodness, your life is meaningless. In other words, you're kind of like bribing people. You're saying, well, you have an incentive. It would be so depressing and sad and meaningless if you didn't believe this fantasy that's so comforting, so go ahead, believe it. Like, that doesn't validate that it's true or real or anything. It just says that all you're saying is that basically you have a desire to believe it. Like, again, the qui bono effect, I hate saying it so many times, but it just means, like, who benefits? Like, you're posing the benefit right there. You're saying people have a strong incentive, a strong bias, a strong desire, a strong preconceived notion to believe this because, the reason why you're believing it isn't because it's true then. It's because you have this egocentric, narcissistic, human-centered desire to believe, to have some false absolute sense of structure, meaning, and so therefore you get to do this. And the reason why you get to do it is because that's what you're saying. So if you don't believe, it would be meaningless. That's why you should believe, not because it actually, again, is rooted in logic or reason or facts or any truth or anything. It would be just because you have, again, it's a very idyllic kind of standard that, don't you want to believe that there's meaning? So you should believe for that reason alone, because you desire it, because you want it, because you have a psychological need or desire for it. Not based on why it's actually true. This is more like why you should believe it or why you would want to believe it. So that's only helping the point that there's an incentive behind it rather than truth behind it, or at least you're not arguing it from that angle. So again, you're saying the reason why people believe in this absolute, false absolute, fantasy, etc., is because it gives them comfort and it gives them structure and it gives them meaning, a sense of meaning. Now, again, there can be a psychological value to that, whether it's true or not, but there's also a situation where again, all you're saying is, wouldn't you rather believe in a meaningful existence than a meaningless existence? So in other words, you have an incentive there, but that's not really an argument. That's just like saying, that's just preference. You're saying, that's a more desirable thing to do, but that doesn't make it true, right? Just because you want it to be. The only question, I can't understand the word he's saying there, and I can't read the subtitles either. The only question something must answer is whether to, self-infliction, I'll call it. I'll avoid the YouTube little stigma. The point is that, or inherent S word, but as absolutists would call it in my absolutist philosophy discussion. Look, only question is whether or not you should perform self-infliction. But that's quite an extreme to jump to. Does that mean every animal should do that if they don't have any other super special sense of purpose or practice? It's mainly the contrivance state that you're recognizing that creates an imbalance that needs to be overcompensated for, and that's why you seek meaning so much. Or again, just the narcissistic, egocentric element of it, and also the simple fact that you have again, it's an extreme to jump to that. Why can't you just have like a naturalistic perspective, like simply you're alive, so make the most of it, enjoy the fruits of nature, literally even, be a hedonist, have orgies, have the maximum amount of experience. But you see a lot of this is inhibited by society. Even if you think it's overcompensated by the machination process, that's a separate debate. But you have this, again, why not just indulge in your inherent desired suggested tendencies? It's a zero-sum process. Make the most of it. Enjoy the fruits of nature, what you have there. Why would the default response be this self-infliction? And the reason why is because you're taking it to an extreme, like, okay, so the world is meaningless, so just enjoy it. But see, that's part of contrivance, is that you can't just do that, because then people would do it uninhibited. You'll hurt and kill and steal and do whatever you want, right, at the expense of contrivance in society, this organized structure, unnatural state. You'll do it at the expense of that, because then you'd be uninhibited. You'd say, what reason do I have to be inhibited when there is no meaning? See, it's more tied to this structure reduction incentive that we take as false absolute, false inherent state of society, contrivance, that, okay, life is meaningless, so let's make the most of it. Let's be hedonists, let's enjoy it, let's take the fruits of nature and just, the world is an oyster, ours for the taking, and let's just enjoy it and do whatever we want, orgies, etc. But oh no, that's not functional for a longevity process in society that isn't even self-aware. And so now we have to be reduced to a half-mast state that controls all that and inhibits all that. So now we seek some special meaning to justify that inhibition and reduction. Whereas, again, absolutists would remove the need, as I always talk about. You don't need meaning. You don't need meaning in the absence of contrivance, because now the inherent reality and tendency speaks for itself. So again, you might be as an animal in nature, but you might be self-aware and more intelligent. But again, you could just naturalistically, okay, you're alive, and so even if you can't explain everything, even if you don't find a sense of meaning in it, you're alive, so you try to live as long as possible. Or you're alive, so you try to have the most experience, the most enjoyable experience, pleasurable experience, the most full experience, the most number of experiences, however you want to explain it. You can have that. So why would the assumption be, oh, let's do self-infliction? That's such an extreme to jump to and doesn't even make any sense. What the hell does he say there? Modern man must answer. And I like this as a machination process buffer as well. Why would modern man ask that? Oh, because now we have the freedom to think. We have free time and means to think because we have surplus of food based on the machination process, technology available. So we've reached such a state of technology that now we can get all full on ourselves and start to, that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'll even agree. I'm a great example of that. Like, back in history when we were cavemen or whatever, we were so concerned with our mere zero-sum survival that we didn't have the time. Not that we didn't have the time. Still, cave paintings and ritualistic things. That's when early religions would have been discussed and stuff. But the point is that you have the time to think about it. So we have all this free time because we have a surplus and our zero-sum means aren't at risk. So we're not as concerned with that. And we're also, have the freedom to think outside of it. And also we have the ability to, rely on surplus and machination process and stuff like that. So now we're in a position of entitlement that we've created a good positive position where we've removed the need for a lot of inherent base tendencies, right? We've reduced it. We've allowed it to become easier to survive. So now we start to question now, what meaning or purpose is there in surviving, right? Like I say, functionalism is the stuff of animals, so if your whole life is just concerned with zero-sum means, then that's basically what you are, but that's basically how people behave anyway, in an overextended, extrapolated sense, right? Like, whatever. That's how modern people act. But yeah, so that's, you're trying to find, like I always say, false meaning in means. Like the meaning of life is just in zero sum. So you might think I'm contradicting myself, but these are just thought processes that you could point to. Like I'm looking at what he's saying. I'm looking at my absolutist philosophy that's not really mine as in I believe it or practice it in my life. I'm saying I have founded some of these thoughts, and it's a very consistent way of thinking. It doesn't mean necessarily that I do that all the time, but right, if you can come up with ideas or express them without being beholden to them necessarily, right? You can discuss it, you can have the idea. So my point is that, man, this has been quite the session, actually. Holy shit. My battery's about to run out, too. So yeah, the self-infliction thing is kind of unwarranted, and also, again, modern man is the key word, because, you're so spoiled now and coddled by technology that you have the luxury and the free time to think about these things that aren't directly related to your zero-sum sustenance. So you start to question and become narcissistic and depressed, and there is a trend of that. Like, if you just keep busy, you won't be depressed because you don't have time to think about it, which is kind of a bad argument, because you should be able to think as much as you want, and if your contrivance state is sound, and if your state of being everything is sound, then thinking is merely a reflection, right? It's like putting a mirror up to something or a microscope up to something. So to say, you should just have to close your eyes and not think or not look at something to be at peace with it is a fallacy, because it's a situation where you should be able to think about as much as you want and it would be fine, right? It's just a reflection of reality in terms of, so the only reason why thinking would be a bad thing is if there's something in reality that it's reflecting that is bad, right? If your life is good and content and high standard, the problem with that is objectivity knows no bounds, so the standard might be unrealistically high. Like there's always something to pick on if you think about it. So you have to be realistic too, but that also feeds into a lower standard. You might not have the highest standard possible, and you can't have it with this overextended, mass-produced suffering quality state that I love these logical razors that sort of just, I don't even need to say it. Like, you know what I mean, and it's well established within my discussions. So I drove like halfway here, more than halfway, and I didn't even get through the video, so I'll wait and I'll do it after this here in a second. Okay, let's try to do the rest of this while, before my battery dies or in the rest of the drive, and hopefully this part will be a little better of the drive. Okay, here we go. So, must answer why not in self-infliction, which is a very... Okay, if your birth, I'm going to go through every single claim you might, if it deserves thought, it deserves consideration, fully, long-form postulate, is an accident. If your birth is an accident, your death is an accident. Now see, even the framing here is narcissistic and egotistical, the way I keep saying, that why does it have to be an accident? Like, accident in what? Like, it's a mistake? Like, okay, when an animal is born, is that an accident, or it's just a normal... it's just a normal part of life. They're breeding because they're alive and because it feels good, and that's, nature's way of inspiring reproduction. Like, so to even say it's an accident, it's more like it's an unexplained phenomenon. It's more like it's random. Sure, you can say that, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad or meaningless, right? So, again, saying it's an accident is weird framing. Like, an accident, aside from something intentional, like God intentionally designed you this way, or with all your flaws that he would then complain about or try to restrict or condemn. But the point is that, so again, whether it's an accident, you can say it's random, but random does not equal bad or meaningless, or that you can't make the most out of it. So this is a strange framing, again, that everything would have to be very particular way to be satisfactory to you. So your life is an accident, but then you at least have control. You don't have control over the birth or the death. Well, to some extent the death, I guess, but you do have control over your life. So even if you say it's an accident or it's a random event, like animals just randomly born and they just are because they are, and you can't trace back the origin and you can't explain everything, even if you can't do that, you're here and you have control now. Once again, taking away control from people with belief systems, etc. You have control now over your life, so now your life, you can maximize what you do instead of just giving up and saying, well, I can't explain everything, I don't have all the meaning behind it, and then you do it this way because you have, it's a strange thing. What reason do you have to suck wind? But again, you're looking at it from as if you need a reason. You're alive. You were born. That's the reason. You didn't choose to be born. You can't explain exactly why or how you were born in terms of all of history, like where did all of existence come from? Not just you, but your parents, and then where did their parents, their parents, their parents, you trace it back far enough. Where did the planet come from? Where did the universe come from? You can't explain all that. But again, why do you need a reason to suck wind? The reason is that you're alive. And again, inherent self-infliction that I talk about, it is your choice to even do that. So if you don't want to, this is absolutist, hypothetical, I'm not saying anything, but right, the point being that what reason do you have? But you're looking at it again in a weird way. Like, why do you have to so you have to justify simply like you're alive, which again, you didn't choose that, nor can you explain its origins, but you have to somehow rationalize that. Like, you're alive, that's why you're living, because you're alive, and you don't want to die, or you want to experience as much as you can, live as long as possible. Animals do that to some extent, like they're trying to at least survive, so you can't just have some baseline, basic, like, self-survival instinct that you want to stay alive just for the sake of staying alive. Like, isn't that enough? So I don't really get the whole framing here. Why not just end it all? But, and again, if that's the conclusion you come to, I mean, it is what it is. But I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it's an extreme to jump to. But the real question is, why value contrivance in a heavily restrictive state? Why not say, well, there's no meaning or higher power structure, so now don't reduce yourself to it and be uninhibited. So, like, who cares about laws and government, and who cares about, social standards and morals? They're all made up constructs just to control you, which objectively they are. That doesn't mean they can't be functional to some degree, but even then they're overextended beyond their purpose of function. And so that's the real issue. You're misframing the enemy. Once again, it's not that, you need a reason to justify something. It's that you are craving this in part because of a contrivance response state that you've been reduced to, and treating that as a false absolute, and again, reinforced possibly by the belief system that we're talking about. It's interesting how ingrained that is. You're seeking meaning, but the only reason why you need meaning or desire it is for that same reason, that you have, similar to the belief system itself, all of this reductive, restrictive structure. Like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're inhibited in some way, you're reduced to structure right from your inherent natural state of being. You're being intellectually dishonest by not thinking about that, again, if you don't have some grand scheme or understanding of everything, and if you don't consider inherent self-infliction, then you're somehow being intellectually dishonest. But again, nowhere in here are you stating like actual facts or logic or reason behind a belief system. You're just simply explaining why it would be comfortable or convenient, or all the incentives behind it. Like, all of this makes you uncomfortable, so you should believe something that makes you feel comfortable, not because it's actually true or valid or logical or anything. So now that's the amazing part. Nowhere in here did he actually make an argument for why a God exists specifically, especially within his faith or a particular faith, or even in general. He doesn't even address that. He's simply saying, well, isn't it so uncomfortable and undesirable that you would be in this state, that you wouldn't have all the answers? So here's a false solution, that here are all the answers hypothetically, and then, false certainty is better than uncertainty, and it'll give you peace of mind and comfort, and it'll make you feel better about yourself. So, which I'm not even necessarily disputing, but those are not arguments for the rationale behind it. So again, you're saying, it's sort of a little bit of a straw manning in there too. Like, oh, if you don't believe in this, then you may as well just self-inflict. Like, what do you mean? Like, there's an in-between. Why can't you just live a basic zero-sum existence and enjoy it to some degree, and, indulge in all the world's pleasures and treasures, and be inhibited by society all the same, and seek overcompensations and structure from that? I'd like to see that as the baseline, though. You're not realizing the role that contrivance response plays in this, but then again, you're actively arguing for a form of contrivance response too in religion itself, would be, to placate that same role. So and the good news of Jesus Christ. Here we go. Here's the plug. At what point did you justify anything to do with Jesus Christ in particular compared to other religions, but even religions in general? The good news is all these psychological needs and discomfort you're feeling will give you this magical cure-all for them. So in other words, believe it because you want to believe it. It's desirable to believe it. It gives you peace of mind to believe it. Not because it's true, not because it's factual, not because it's accurate, but because, you have these psychological needs and uncertainties, so therefore believe whatever we tell you without question. Jesus Christ, there's eternal life, so you got to reduce yourself to a half-mast state where you can't fully live this life, where you're constantly inhibited, like contrivance, society, etc. You're constantly inhibited, so you reduce this life in half-mass, zero-sum. You reduce this life to a lesser state, a less full existence, for the promises of, an eternal life or heaven. So you see that's just a means to control people, to make them comfortable or content with that state of being, of living in a lesser state than their full and uninhibited existence. And once again, just the desire, like, don't you want to go to heaven? So why wouldn't you believe? But sure, I would want a lot of things, but just because you want something doesn't make it true. Like, I don't know how much I can explain that. A lot of this whole thing is just, don't you wish this was the case? So you should believe it's the case because you wish it's the case, right? Don't you want some perfect absolute meaning? Don't you want some structure? Don't you want some answers to all the questions in the universe? We're not actually going to provide those, but you can just believe in them anyway and just don't think about it, as if that's not intellectually dishonest as well. And very carefully use the talents that God has blessed you with to look at the ego in that, though. Why couldn't you just use what you have to try to survive without God being involved? Trying to give it a sense of purpose, like, it's not an accident. Right, like as if that framing even makes sense, that it wouldn't need to be an accident, it could just be an event that happened. We assign, even me saying it's random, we're trying to assign a rhyme and reason to it, but that's a human way of thinking. That's even, like I say, the need to be created is a human idea. Make the world more like heaven, then we could remove the need for heaven, right? That's the first absolutist correct thing he said here, is that make the world more like heaven, then we don't have to worry about heaven as much. Right? Then we don't have to reduce our life to a half-mast state, and we already have heaven right here. But that's kind of an odd thing to even say. But again, peasants working for promises of heaven, living in a lesser state that they otherwise wouldn't tolerate because of that, for promises of something unconfirmed that they can't verify. I mean, it's a great way to psychologically control people. I have to give it up, but it's not too prudent, really. All it shows is a psychological need that you have, right? It's comforting, it's desirable, it gives you false certainty, it gives you peace of mind, it gives you, peace with death in terms of... So you realize in that there's that subliminal manifestation of each of these things, like... It's a reflection of a lot of desires that people have, or insecurities that people have, fears that people have, everything like that. And we call that... There's a line like that from the Seventh Seal, actually. We make an idol of our fear, and that idol we call God, right? We're afraid of death, so there's heaven. We're afraid of getting killed, so everyone who hurts us would go to hell. We're afraid of, whatever we need psychologically, it'll give us, whether it's true or accurate or real or whatever. And then let me watch it again. Meaningless. Again, accident is sort of preconceived framing. So your birth is not an accident, your death is not an accident. And we're going to wave the little carrot on a stick of eternal life to try to control you in this life and minimize and reduce you to a half-mast state where you're not fully alive and fully maximizing your potential and experience in this existence. We're going to use the promise of some greater existence to reduce this one. Imagine that. Imagine the greatest point that I could possibly make, but you just don't get it. Which is that I'm acting like I'm talking to the guy, but you know what I mean? Like, you're using the promise of this, right? Eternal life, heaven, etc., to control and reduce and restrict people here, right? And not let them live their full uninhibited experience and existence. And so you reduce it to a controlled state, and the controlled state is very undesirable. Or whatever, not inherent desire suggested. And so that turned into a whole fucking hour-long discussion, but a lot of my good logical razors in there. I feel so weird in doing this, but whatever. That was a horrible kind of... It's just a short video, so I don't want to judge it too harshly. Like, he might make other better points elsewhere, but it's so wrong-headed because you're arguing from, again, a point of desire, right? Everything he's saying, let me count the desirable moments, like, it's meaningless to live without God, so you should pretend God exists because that gives you an illusion of meaning. Why not self-inflict? You're saying accident, human-centric. That's a very negative perspective. Here is a promise of eternal life. Don't you want to believe in all these things? That's basically what he's saying. Your desire. He's exploiting your desire. Don't you want to believe in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus? Don't you want to believe that everything's perfect the way you want it to be? Don't you want to believe in eternal life? Don't you want to believe in heaven? Don't you want to believe that all these standards we have are absolute? Don't you want to believe? So none of that's an argument for why it's actually true or the case. It's just trying to exploit your desires and your peace of mind, insecurities and stuff. And the way that you can exploit that is basically by, again, that's all he's saying in here. Like, none of these are actual arguments. They're only just, your life would be meaningless, and you would feel this need to even do the thing I was talking about, the S word. So now, because you'd feel meaningless, you're not providing actual meaning. You're saying you should believe in something that would give you that impression of meaning. So you're just trying to take advantage of somebody then. Like, look how meaningless your life feels. So now we're going to try to find refuge in something, try to find comfort in something. That doesn't make that something valid or accurate or real or true or absolute. It just makes it, again, like a necessary delusion or outlet or closure or peace of mind, right, that you could have. again, I'm not even denying, okay, even if you believe it is valid, that's not a very good argument for why it's valid, right? To say, don't you have this need for peace of mind and comfort and certainty and everything? Oh, yes, indeed, human beings do have that need and desire. So, okay, cool, but now where is the answer? Give us the answer. Give us, why is it the case? And again, I could even use it in the particular faith argument, like, why specifically is Christianity, Jesus Christ, that answer, as opposed to other religions or other belief systems or, again, other perspectives, measure, worldview. But even outside of that, why... you would have to qualify that particular specific belief and also just this time, like, I don't know, that was much more exhausting than it had any business being, and so that's fine.